There are forgotten places where silence doesn't bring peace, but conceals a horrifying secret. There are melodies that should never be played, for they are born from the pain of the dead. Welcome, all brave souls, to Tales from Vietnam's Darkness. In today's video, we will explore one such melody. The story of a composer searching for silence, only to be imprisoned by a ghostly symphony, a devil's masterpiece known as the Symphony of Bones. Right now, make sure you hit that like button to support us. And more importantly, press subscribe to explore more haunting tales together. Are you ready? The journey into darkness begins. Symphony of Bones. Part 1, The Prelude of Silence. Chapter 1, Whisper Creek. Liam, a film composer from the ceaseless hum of Los Angeles, had never believed in true silence. To him, the world was an infinite symphony of frequencies. The buzz of a studio monitor, the distant wail of a siren bleeding through soundproofed glass, the very rhythm of his own heart, everything was sound, waiting to be heard. But that same cacophonous world had bled him dry. A lucrative contract for a major Hollywood blockbuster had become his personal hell. For 3 months, not a single authentic note had come from him. His creativity was a barren desert. He needed an escape. He needed silence. He found it in an obscure online listing, historic Victorian estate for long-term lease in Whisper Creek, Maine. Absolute solitude. Ideal for an artist's retreat. The accompanying photos showed a 2-story stone manor, draped in ivy, standing alone on a hill overlooking a valley perpetually choked with fog. The town's name, Whisper Creek, and the estate's name, Melody House, felt like a cruel joke, yet they called to him. The wheezing bus left Liam, his suitcase, and his state-of-the-art recording gear at the bottom of the hill. The cold, damp air hit his lungs, thick with the smell of wet earth, decaying leaves, and something ancient, something forgotten. Whisper Creek lived up to its name. The moss-covered roofs of the few houses in the valley swam in and out of the dense fog, giving the place an ethereal, dreamlike quality. There were no cars, no city sounds, only the sighing of wind through pine trees. The caretaker, a man named Silas, was ancient. His back was a permanent arch, his face a roadmap of wrinkles. He spoke little, merely gesturing for Liam to follow him up the winding stone path. As they ascended, Melody House loomed larger, imposing and utterly alone. It was beautiful in a deeply unsettling way. Does this place have any history? Liam asked, trying to puncture the oppressive quiet. Silas let out a dry, rattling cough. It's old. Built by a Frenchman. Ain't been lived in for a long, long time. Who was the owner? Gone. All of them. Just a shell now. Silas's gaze flickered strangely over the rusted iron gate. Head on in. Everything's ready. My cottage is at the foot of the hill if you need anything. But you mind this, he stopped, turning to face Liam, his clouded eyes boring into him, don't you go wandering the halls at night. And you stay the hell out of the cellar. The warning, rather than instilling fear, ignited the artist's curiosity in Liam. He nodded dismissively, taking the heavy, ice-cold ring of keys from the old man's gnarled hand. The massive oak door groaned open with a mournful creak, like the house itself was sighing after decades of holding its breath. Inside, the air was colder still. Every piece of furniture was draped in a white dust sheet, resembling a congregation of patient ghosts. Liam pulled a sheet off a grand piano in the center of the living room. The ivory keys were yellowed and cracked. He pressed one. A single, clear note rang out, achingly lonely in the vast space. It was a stone dropped into a perfectly still lake, its invisible ripples spreading through the entire house. The first night passed in an almost divine peace. Liam set up his equipment, turning the living room into a makeshift studio. He armed his most sensitive microphones, put on his headphones, and just listened. He could hear the wind moaning at the windows, the scrape of a branch against the roof, the chirr of nocturnal insects. And beneath it all, a profound, near-total silence. It was exactly what he'd been searching for. A flicker of hope ignited within him. Here, he would find his muse again. He didn't know that the silence of Melody House wasn't empty. It was listening. Chapter 2, The Phantom Note. The next few days, Liam immersed himself in his work. He walked the misty hills each morning, recording the sounds of nature, birdsong, the gurgle of a hidden stream, the rustle of pine needles. He was building an auditory library of Whisper Creek, a foundation for his score. But there was one sound he could never capture. It came on the third night. As he sat before his monitors, arranging audio clips, he heard it. A single, ethereal note, crisp as a wind chime yet warm as a cello. It emanated from somewhere inside the house, lasted for perhaps 2 seconds, and then vanished. Liam ripped off his headphones. He held his breath, listening. Only the wind. He scrubbed back through the recording on his computer. Nothing. His high-fidelity microphones hadn't picked up a thing. Must be auditory fatigue, he muttered. Working too hard. But it came again the next night. This time, it was 2 notes, a low and a high, a perfect, haunting interval. They were clearer, seemingly closer. Liam instantly checked his equipment. Still nothing. He was a professional sound engineer. For his ears to perceive something his multi-$1,000 equipment couldn't was an insult to his craft, an assault on his logic. He decided to search the house. The old floorboards groaned under his weight. Moonlight slanted through the tall, mullioned windows, casting grotesque shadows on the floor. He moved through each room, listening. The library, with its thousands of dusty, forgotten books. The dining hall and its long, empty table. The master bedroom with its colossal 4-poster bed. All were deathly still. He stopped before a small door at the end of the second-floor hallway. It was smaller than the others, secured with a rusted iron padlock. He tried the handle. It was locked solid. He didn't remember Silas giving him a key for it. Curiosity gnawed at him. He went back for a paperclip and a pair of pliers. After 10 minutes of fumbling, the lock clicked open. Inside was a small study. Unlike the other rooms, it was not covered in sheets. It looked as though its occupant had just stepped out for a moment. A large mahogany desk was littered with handwritten musical manuscripts, an inkwell, and a dried-out fountain pen. The walls were covered in anatomical drawings of the human body, interspersed with diagrams of acoustic frequencies and harmonic waves. A chill snaked down Liam's spine. The morbid, clinical fusion of music and anatomy was deeply disturbing. He approached the desk. The music was written in a bizarre notation he'd never seen, adorned with strange, ritualistic-looking symbols. But it was the title of the work that made his blood run cold, La Symphonie de Os, the Symphony of Bones. Beneath it, a handwritten note in French, Chaque os sa propre résonance. Chaque âme a sa propre mélodie. Every bone has its own resonance. Every soul has its own melody. At that exact moment, he heard the note again. This time, it had no direction. It bloomed from within his own skull. Clear, resonant, and utterly sorrowful. He stumbled back in terror, knocking over a chair with a loud crash. He fled the room, slamming the door behind him but not locking it, and sprinted back to the living room, his heart hammering against his ribs. He didn't sleep that night. The phantom notes played in his head, a relentless, disembodied choir. They were no longer single tones. They were beginning to link together, forming short, fragmented, and haunting melodies. A music that had no earthly origin. And Liam, with the chilling certainty of a musician, realized the horrifying truth: he wasn't mishearing things. Someone, or something, was composing inside his mind. Chapter 3, Echoes of the Past. Fear soon gave way to obsession. Liam couldn't stop thinking about the secret study and the Symphony of Bones. He had to know who lived here, who wrote that insane music. The next morning, he went to find Silas. The old man was splitting firewood, his face impassive. "Silas," Liam began, his voice tight. "I need to ask you about the previous owner of Melody House. Who was he?" Silas paused, his axe resting on the chopping block. "What's it to you? The past is best left buried. I'm a composer. I found a study upstairs, full of music. I'm just curious about the artist." A shadow fell over Silas's face. He sighed, setting the axe down. That was Émile Dubois's room. A French conductor. Bought the house back in the 40s. What was he like? "A genius," Silas said, his voice trembling slightly. "They said he was a musical genius. And a monster. He was obsessed with finding new sounds, sounds no one had ever heard before. Said ordinary instruments were dead things. Soulless." Liam swallowed hard. Soulless? He believed the purest sound had to come from something that was alive. Or had once been alive. Silas looked directly at Liam. "Folks in the valley still tell the stories. He had his own private orchestra, but his musicians weren't the living. He had a workshop in the cellar, where he crafted his instruments." Liam's stomach clenched. Crafted his instruments? They say he made a xylophone from a human ribcage, a flute from a femur, strings for his violins from human sinew. He called it his bone orchestra. Bile rose in Liam's throat. He remembered Silas's warning about the cellar, the anatomical charts, the Symphony of Bones. The horrifying pieces were snapping together. So, what happened to Émile Dubois? Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Vanished," Silas said flatly. "One stormy night in 1954, the most terrible music anyone had ever heard poured out of that house, all night long. The next morning, it all went silent. Police came. Found no one. Dubois and his entire staff, gone without a trace. The house was sealed up for decades. They tried leasing it out a few times since, but no one ever stayed longer than a week." Silas stared into the distance. "You're the longest. Maybe 'cause you're a musician, too. Maybe. He likes you." That last sentence was a blade twisting in Liam's mind. He thanked the old man numbly and walked back to the house. Now, Melody House no longer looked beautiful. It looked like a tomb. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was pregnant with anticipation, like the pause between notes in a funeral dirge. That night, Liam sat with every light in the house blazing. But the music in his head grew louder, more complex, more violent. He could hear the shriek of a bone flute, the ghastly clatter of the ribcage xylophone, the gut-wrenching draw of a sinew-strung bow. He didn't just hear it. He began to understand it. The melody told the story of agony, of despair, of a transcendent madness. It was the music of trapped souls, their bodies desecrated and transformed into instruments for a madman's art. Then, a new sound emerged. A voice, whispering in French, woven into the demonic orchestra in his mind. Le maestro a besoin d'un compositeur. Le finale doit être écrit. The maestro needs a composer. The finale must be written. Liam screamed, clutching his head. He knew what it wanted. Émile Dubois wasn't gone. His spirit was shackled to this house, to his ghoulish orchestra. And he had been waiting, for over half a century, for someone who could hear his music, understand it. Someone who could help him finish his ultimate masterpiece. He had chosen Liam. Part 2, The Crescendo of Madness. Chapter 4, The Unwilling Composer. Terror gave way to a primal need to flee. Liam had to get out. Now. At the first hint of dawn, he frantically packed a bag. He left his expensive equipment, his laptop, his entire life's work. He just wanted to escape this cursed place. He bolted out the door, running down the hill without a backward glance. But when he reached his car, he stopped dead. All 4 tires were flat, slashed to ribbons. Impossible. They were fine last night. He pulled out his phone. No signal. In this isolated valley, that was to be expected, but now it felt like a death sentence. He ran to Silas's cottage. The door was locked. He pounded on it, yelling, but there was no answer. It was as if the entire town of Whisper Creek had conspired to keep him here. Defeated, he trudged back up the hill. The house sat there, patiently, like a predator awaiting the return of its cornered prey. As he stepped across the threshold, a sudden, icy gust of wind slammed the great oak door shut behind him. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed through the hall like a final, damning judgment. He was trapped. From that day on, the terror was no longer subtle. It was a relentless, brutal assault. Doors slammed open and shut. Objects flew across rooms. He constantly saw fleeting white shapes in his peripheral vision. At night, the house came alive with the sounds of phantom footsteps, whispers, and sorrowful weeping that seeped from the very walls. But the music was the worst torment. The ghostly symphony was no longer confined to his mind. It had bled into reality. He would hear the piano playing by itself in the dead of night, the bone flute shrieking from the dark hallways, a rhythmic, skeletal tapping coming from the cellar. The house had become the instrument, and the tortured spirits were its orchestra. Liam began to break. He couldn't eat or sleep. He wandered the house like a specter, his body wasting away, dark circles blooming under his eyes. The silence he had craved was now a weapon, each quiet moment a breath held before the next auditory horror. Madness began to fray the edges of his mind. He would find himself sitting at the piano, his fingers gliding over the keys, playing the melodies from his head. It wasn't him anymore. Some external force was composing through him. He fought it. He slammed his fists on the keys, bit his own lip until it bled to shock himself back to reality. But the more he resisted, the stronger the influence became. One night, He awoke to find himself standing before Émile's study. The door was wide open. Inside, the Symphony of Bones lay open on the desk. A fresh, blank page was waiting. The whisper returned, so close it felt like hot breath on his neck. Écris. Compose pour moi. Termine mon chef d'oeuvre. Write. Compose for me. Finish my masterpiece. An unseen force pushed him into the chair. His hand, shaking uncontrollably, reached for the pen. No! He screamed in his mind, but his body was no longer his to command. His hand began to move across the page, writing the first notes of the symphony's final movement, the finale. The music that flowed from the pen was not born of intellect. It was crystallized fear, distilled agony. The melody was at once tragic and terrifyingly triumphant, a controlled, malevolent chaos. It was a thing of grotesque beauty, a sound that could only have been born in hell. He had become the devil's composer. Chapter 5, Waltz of the Shrouds. Completing the first part of the finale unlocked a new, deeper level of horror. Émile Dubois was no longer content with merely borrowing Liam's hands. He wanted a performance. On the nights of the full moon, Melody House would truly awaken. The grand living room became a spectral ballroom. The white dust sheets covering the furniture would rise into the air, twisting and turning in the moonlight as if they were phantom couples engaged in a slow, macabre waltz. The piano played the unholy music Liam had just written, while the invisible bone orchestra accompanied it with its cacophony of horror. Liam was forced to be the sole audience member. He was pinned to an armchair by an invisible weight, his eyes forced open, made to witness the phantasmagoria. He saw the shimmering, translucent forms of men and women, the staff, the victims of Émile, materialize from the shadows. Dressed in the fashions of a bygone era, their faces were blank, their eyes hollow voids. They took each other's hands, joining the waltz of the shrouds. They didn't dance on the floor. They floated, inches above it. Their steps were silent, their presence marked only by the rustle of decaying fabric and the sound of mournful sighs that harmonized with the music. And Émile Dubois was there. Not as a full apparition, but as a tall, commanding silhouette of pure darkness, standing where a conductor would stand. Liam couldn't see his face, but he could feel his presence, a palpable aura of power, evil, and profound satisfaction. His invisible hand would raise, and the waltz would become faster, more frantic. The spirits spun in a dizzying vortex. The shrouds whipped through the air. The music swelled into a deafening, chaotic frenzy. The giggles of women, the whispers of men, the cry of a child. All of it blended into a single, terrifying chord of insanity. Liam squeezed his eyes shut, but the images were burned onto the backs of his eyelids. He covered his ears, but the symphony erupted from within him, from his own blood and bone. He was part of this performance. His blood was the ink, his fear was the melody. The nightmare continued until the moon began to set. As the first rays of dawn touched the windows, everything would cease instantly. The music would die. The spirits would evaporate. The shrouds would collapse back onto the furniture. Silence, heavy and dead, reclaimed the room. Only Liam remained, trembling and broken in the armchair, his sanity worn down to a single, fraying thread. He knew he couldn't take another performance. If he didn't escape, he would become one of them, a permanent resident of Melody House, waltzing with ghosts for eternity. He had to fight back. But how do you fight music with silence? How do you fight a ghost with flesh and blood? Chapter 6, The Cellar. The answer lay in the place he feared most. The cellar. It was the monster's heart, Émile's workshop, the source of all the horror. Silas had warned him. Émile's own spirit seemed to guard it, intensifying the hauntings whenever Liam even approached the cellar door, as if to distract him. Liam knew, with a terrifying certainty, that to end the symphony, he had to destroy the instruments. He armed himself. He found an iron crowbar in a woodshed and an old, heavy-duty flashlight. He waited until high noon, when the sun was at its peak, hoping its light might weaken the darkness within the house. The cellar door was under the main staircase, hidden by a threadbare Persian rug. A thick iron bar secured it. Using all his strength, Liam pried the bar loose. The door swung inward, revealing a set of dark, stone steps and releasing a gust of frigid, foul air that smelled of damp, decay, and faintly of old blood. He switched on the flashlight and descended. The stone steps were slick with moisture. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. The sound of his own footsteps echoed unnervingly in the oppressive silence. The cellar was a labyrinth of interconnected stone chambers. Water dripped from the sweating walls. He swept the beam of his flashlight around. Rusted surgical tools, saws, clamps, scalpels, were scattered on stone tables. Incomplete human skeletons hung from the walls. He entered the main chamber. And he saw them. Émile Dubois's orchestra. They were displayed on stone pedestals like exhibits in a museum of the grotesque. A harp whose frame was a human ribcage, strung with glistening, stretched tendons. A drum kit with drumheads of dried, taut human skin. And there, in the center, was the xylophone from Silas's story. Its keys, cut to varying lengths, were unmistakably human ribs, polished and filed to produce precise, musical tones. Flutes carved from arms and legs. A viola with a resonant body made from a human pelvis. It was a sight beyond human nightmare. Liam felt the acid rise in his throat. These souls hadn't just been murdered. They had been disassembled, desecrated, their very remains twisted into a mockery of life, their spirits bound to the instruments of their own torture. He gripped the crowbar, his knuckles white. It was now or never. With a roar of pure, desperate rage, he charged toward the ribcage xylophone, swinging the crowbar high. But before the iron could connect, a greater roar answered his, shaking the very foundations of the house. The torches on the walls, long dead, erupted into spectral flame, illuminating a dark figure coalescing in the far corner of the room. The shade of Émile Dubois. Sharper, more defined than ever before. He was dressed in a conductor's tailcoat, holding a long, slender baton. With a jolt of absolute horror, Liam realized the baton was a human spine. Commodus's too. How dare you? The voice was no longer a whisper. It was a psychic bellow of pure fury that slammed into Liam's mind. Tu veux détruire mon art? Mon orchestra? Mon aim? You want to destroy my art? My orchestra? My soul? The crowbar in Liam's hand became searingly hot and was ripped from his grasp. An immense, unseen pressure crushed him to the floor. He couldn't move, could only watch as the phantom conductor glided toward him. Le finale n'est pas encore terminé, Émile roared. J'ai besoin de mes instruments. Mais plus important encore. J'ai besoin d'un chef d'orchestre. The finale is not yet finished. And I need my instruments. But more importantly, I need a conductor. his shadow fell over Liam, and a soul-deep cold pierced him. He felt his consciousness, his very self, being devoured by a vast, ancient evil. Émile no longer wanted to borrow his hands. He wanted to possess him entirely, so that Liam, in the flesh, would be the one to raise the spinal baton and conduct the final, terrifying performance of the Symphony of Bones. Part 3, The Finale of Eternity. Chapter 7, Harmony of Two Worlds. The war was no longer in the cellar. It was inside Liam's mind. He found himself adrift in a black, infinite void. The music of Émile's symphony swirled around him, constricting him like spectral pythons. The conductor's consciousness was a tempest, ripping at the fabric of Liam's mind, trying to override it. Émile flooded him with his memories, the perverse ecstasy of his experiments, the godlike joy of creating a new instrument, the all-consuming obsession to complete his life's work. Liam felt his own memories fading. Who was he? Was he a composer from Los Angeles? Or had he always been Émile Dubois, maestro of the damned? He fought, clinging to the fragments of his own life. The image of the chaotic LA skyline. The faces of his friends. The melodies he had written, music about love, hope, and life. That was it. Music. Émile's weapon was music. Liam would fight back with the same. Focusing his entire will, he began to compose a melody in his mind. Not something complex or grand. The simplest, purest thing he could remember. A lullaby. The one his mother used to sing to him as a child. A melody of unconditional love, of safety, of peace. As the first notes of the lullaby bloomed in his consciousness, Émile's symphony faltered. The conductor's music was forged from pain and fear. It had no defense against a melody of such purity. Tu est que cette sorcellerie? What is this sorcery? Émile's consciousness shrieked with rage and confusion. Liam didn't answer. He just played his lullaby, stronger now, more defiant. It was a clean, cool stream flowing into Émile's toxic swamp, cleansing it. The wailing sounds of the bone orchestra began to sour, to crack. The two melodies clashed in a titanic battle. The violent, Baroque complexity of the Symphony of Bones versus the gentle, simple truth of a mother's lullaby. In the cellar, Liam's body convulsed on the stone floor. The shade of Émile flickered violently, dissolving and reforming as if being attacked from within. The entire house shuddered. The bone instruments began to vibrate, emitting shrill, discordant tones of their own accord. Inside his mind, Liam poured every last ounce of his being into the final note of the lullaby. It was his only chance. He screamed the note, a soundless, psychic tone that contained all of his love, hope, and will to live. And everything shattered. Émile's symphony imploded. The black void in Liam's mind cracked like glass, brilliant white light pouring through. A final, agonized scream from Émile echoed and then faded into nothing. In the cellar, there was a deafening crack. The ribcage xylophone exploded into 1,000 pieces. One by one, the other instruments fractured, crumbled, and fell into heaps of dust and splintered bone. The shadow of Émile Dubois let out one final shriek, not of anger, but of utter defeat, and dissolved into the air, leaving behind a silence that was sudden, absolute, and profound. Liam opened his eyes. He was lying on the cellar floor. Exhausted, but alive. And, most importantly, he was himself again. Chapter 8, Coda. A true silence finally fell upon Melody House. Not the waiting, listening silence from before, but the empty, peaceful silence of a place released from a long torment. With the destruction of the instruments, the trapped souls were finally free. Liam could feel it. The oppressive weight was gone, replaced by a clean, quiet sense of peace. He staggered to his feet and walked out of the cellar for the last time. He moved through the now empty rooms of the great house, no longer feeling any presence but his own. He stepped out the front door and took a deep, cleansing breath of the morning air. The fog had lifted. Sunlight streamed down into the valley. He walked to the bottom of the hill. His car was there. Miraculously, the tires were fully inflated. Silas was waiting, his expression no longer cold, but one of quiet gratitude. "I knew you could do it," the old man said softly. "The house chose the right one." Liam couldn't speak. He was too tired. He got in his car, started the engine, and drove away from Whisper Creek, and never once looked in the rearview mirror. Months later, Liam was back in Los Angeles. He finished the score for the Hollywood film. It was hailed as a masterpiece. Critics praised its incredible emotional depth. It was tragic, hopeful, and beautiful, with an indefinable, haunting quality no one could quite put their finger on. He never told a soul what happened at Melody House. It was a secret he would carry to his grave. Sometimes, late at night in the quiet of his studio, he thinks he can hear a single, phantom note playing in the far distance. But he knows it's just an echo. He had defeated the monster, but at a cost. He could never again believe in absolute silence. Because he knew that deep within every quiet space, there is a melody waiting to be heard. And not all of them are songs of light. Melody House still stands on its hill above Whisper Creek, silent once more. But the locals say that on nights when the moon is full, if you listen very, very carefully, you can hear the wind as it passes through the old house. And it sounds, they say, like a lullaby. A final coda for the souls who have, at long last, found their rest.